We're live. Okay, welcome to another episode of the Better Brain Fitness Podcast. As usual, I am joined by my bibliophilic co-host, Dr. Tommy Wood. Hello, Tommy.
Hello.
So, on our episode today, Tommy is going to be sharing with you guys a special announcement of an exciting milestone that just happened for him. So, Tommy, you want to take it away? You want to tell the audience what exciting thing just happened?
Yeah. Thanks everybody for listening first. And just last week, my book, which I've been working on for the last sort of 18 months, but really the last 6 months is pretty much the only thing I did was write this book. It just went on pre-sale. So it comes out next March, but nowadays the idea is that, goes on sale several months in advance. You sort of like drum up interest in the book over time, and our podcast and listeners and Substack followers will be the first, obviously, to know about this and see the pre-sale. And hopefully we'll get to it at some point. Talk a little bit about what I'd like to give people if they're interested in buying the book early, even though it's now still several months away. So hopefully it can sort of entice some people with some free goodies.
Yeah, and those, like you said, the pre-sales are actually super helpful. They help for those initial sales numbers. They count towards it. So yeah, everybody tries to get those. Plus, if you get it this far out, you'll totally have forgotten by the time it comes out that you bought it, and you'll just be like, you got a free book.
Yeah.
So the earlier the better. Certainly that would happen to me. So why don't we talk a little bit about what the book is? Tell us what the title is, and maybe kind of the process. What made you decide to write the book, and what was kind of the message, the story that you particularly wanted to tell?
Yeah. So the book is called The Stimulated Mind, and it's being published by Penguin Imprints, Harmony over here in the US, and Ebury in the UK. So it's a little bit of a joint project between the two. And that's kind of part of the genesis of this actual book as well, because it was started by an editor, or my editor in the UK, Anya Hayes, who emailed me after she heard me on a podcast. She heard me speak on Rangan Chatterjee's podcast, Feel Better, Live More, and was like, you should write a book. So that was the first time that I really started to consider it. Although I will say that I've wanted to write a book for more than 10 years. And I even started writing a book during my PhD. It was going to be called Eat Better, or at least that was the title in my head. But I sat down, and I can't remember why I started writing about dairy. And then I got into osteoporosis, and why osteoporosis isn't just about calcium. And then I started talking about magnesium and vitamin D, and I'd written like 20,000 words. And I was like, and this is just 3% of what I planned to write about. And then after that, I just kind of gave up, because I was like, I'm never going to get this done. And there have also been people that I've spoken to over the years who are like, well, there's no point in writing a book, because as soon as you've written it, it's out of date. And and there are obviously elements of that. And I think that most of what's in this book is pretty timeless, but you do have to address some of aspects of the modern environment. Like I talk a little bit about AI and sort of modern stimulation modalities where the research will improve over time. But I think the majority is probably going to be mostly right for a fairly long time, just because it's nothing new necessarily. If that makes it so, you know what I mean? It's things that we've known for a long time, sort of in a sort of like brought together in a practical way. So there was a time when I did reach out. This was a few years ago. I reached out to some agents to try and understand like how to kind of get this book writing process, and done and a friend of mine introduced me to their agent, and I had a conversation with him, and it became clear very quickly that he wasn't interested in working with me. And so then that kind of put it on the back burner. But this time, I reached out to my friend Gabrielle Lyon. She introduced me to her agent Joy, who then sort of manhandled me into putting together a proper proposal and getting this out to editors and stuff. So you're really just getting the expertise from people and how to even start this process, because I didn't really know anything about it. But then the goal really was to put together a book that outlines there's a little bit of history around why I don't think we've made great sort of leaps into preventing dementia, maintaining cognitive function late in life, largely arranged around this idea that we've focused too much on what a brain looks like under a microscope. So there's a little bit of the history of neuroscience, because that was the main tool that we had originally, and then some of the history of reductionism in science, like where we try and figure out, like, isolate one thing and figure out what that one thing does, when in fact the brain only works the way it does because of this bigger idea of something called emergence, where you actually can't predict what the brain will do based on its constituent parts, and that's kind of some of the magic of it. And then from there, you're going into the things that we do know about how we can enhance or maintain cognitive function late in life, plus an introduction of the model that we've actually talked about on the podcast, 3S model, with sort of stimulus being the primary driver of cognitive function that can then be supported by a whole host of other factors.
For those of you who are just joining us, Tommy, the announcement that's referred to in the title of the email is that Tommy has his new book and it's available for pre-sale now. I mention this because I know that by the time people get the announcement that this has started, right, that they come in and then they don't know that they come in the middle of the conversation. So that is the big announcement for those who've just joined us, that Tommy's book is now available for pre-sale, called The Stimulated Mind. So yeah, you mentioned that it is quite a process, right, from beginning to end to get a book done, like just getting an agent, right, we're writing the proposal, so forth. So yeah, it's a huge thing to get accomplished. So just congrats on that aspect alone.
Thanks.
I'm curious to know along the course of writing it, so both in terms of doing the research and in terms of doing the writing, if that modified, or if your thoughts on any particular topic evolved during the course of it. I find personally that either you inevitably go down certain rabbit holes and expand what you know, but also just the process of writing often helps to sharpen my thinking or think about things in new ways. So anything you think of that changed at all from some sort of when you started the book and to now, including like things that you put in there that you wouldn't have maybe necessarily thought you'd be putting in there before?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think when I was trying to sort of envision this bigger picture of how everything fits together and all the areas that have been worked on. So, there's a little bit of the story of the amyloid cascade hypothesis. And originally, I'd planned to kind of slate it entirely. But I think that there's enough to kind of, I spent a lot of time reading about it. And we've talked about why it's just assuming that that's the primary driver is inherently flawed. And I still think that's true. But it still clearly plays a role. Like, I couldn't just discount it entirely. So it kind of, it seems like maybe something like 25% of the trajectory of cognitive function may be related to amyloid. Doesn't mean that amyloid just doesn't just like suddenly appear in the brain, right? There are other things that are driving that, so you can still focus on upstream factors. But I don't think that we could discount that entirely just because there is some work in that area that is certainly relevant to making sure that we can treat and address Alzheimer's disease and dementia. It's just very clear that that's not the only thing. And so I wrote a lot more about other cells in the brain that maybe I thought I would. So neurons only make up about 50% of the cells in the brain. And once you take into all the other cells, like there's the microglia, which are the immune cells of the brain, oligodendrocytes, which are responsible for the white matter in the brain, astrocytes, which kind of regulate fluid flow and energetics. And then there's the vascular system, and like the brain is essentially just cells implanted in this really dense network of blood vessels. So I think I wrote a lot more about those than I had planned to, but that's because it's just increasingly clear that those are sort of critical components of all then the upstream factors, right? They're the cells that help respond to stimulus or physical activity, or that require certain nutrients in order to function at their best. So I think kind of moving a little bit away from that neuron-centric view was maybe not something that I anticipated, at least initially. And then I think as you sort of build things out, there's like lots of little bits that come up. So somebody just asked a question about the gut microbiome and the gut-brain axis, right? And that's become this big field, or this big area of focus in the last 5 to 10 years or so. But it's tricky because we know that it's important and it plays a role, but we don't know necessarily how it should look and how we should manipulate it. And so I went back and forth, and I went really deep into the literature and came back out. And in general, I think we can say, yes, the gut microbiome is really important, and it has this bidirectional relationship with the brain. But the best way to improve gut health is to do all the other things that improve overall physical health, right? Physical activity, sleep, stress mitigation. And I have like a chapter on each of those. So even though it could get really complex, actually the answer is essentially the same. And I think that sort of came up again and again, which is whenever you look at all these different complex mechanisms, which people like to focus on because, as we talked about in our podcast with James Hewitt, that, you add this sort of like flair of complex mechanism, and it sounds much more, it's like credible just by adding sciencey stuff. But then when you actually look at the things that move those levers, it's the same things again and again and again. So then it just became about like, how can you make stuff really practical and applicable, and get the information across. And I saw that Kate Sugel joined the stream, and she's a professional writer who helped me shape the final part of how the book looks, to kind of make sure that those messages were coming across. And it's a much better book because of her help. So I would be remiss if I didn't mention that.
What percentage of the book was written in the final 2 weeks?
Actually, surprisingly, little of it.
That's impressive.
the final chapter was written in the last 2 weeks. But that was about it. So actually, the final chapter then got cut by my editor. So the last 2 weeks I was distributing that chapter throughout the rest of the book because I didn't want to lose that content. So I kind of cheated.
Squeezed it in there,
and squeezed it in to other places. But it was fairly steady. Like I was under quite a lot of time pressure by the end, as you would expect. But I kind of knew 4 or 5 months out when it really needed to be done by, and the progress was fairly steady up to that point. It's one of those things where I probably remember it being much less bad
Right.
than it actually was, and it was probably pretty stressful.
Yeah, which is why you might consider doing it again.
Yeah, exactly.
Who would you consider to be the primary audience for this book?
I think it's mainly people who are, I guess, my age and older, maybe a little bit younger, like people in their 30s and older. So people who are really starting to think about their long-term brain health, and it's become quite a popular topic, right? We're seeing a lot more about the brain and mental health, cognitive health, dementia risk, and then, people sort of our age are thinking about their own brains, they're thinking about their parents' brains. So trying to figure out what they can do about it, it's essentially that kind of group. So I would like to say that it's a fairly broad audience, especially because a lot of the ideas come together so the final chapter is more focused on, throughout it's both the things that you can do today, improve your cognitive function today, but then also minimize the risk of decline long term. But the sort of how we structure our work day and how we approach work and how we do that and minimizing the chance of burnout. Some of the things that we talked about with James, those are in the final chapter of the book. We talked with James Hewitt on the last episode. And so that I think is relevant to everybody. It's relevant to students. It's relevant to, people as they enter the world of work. And then, also those who have been in the world of work for several decades, because then there's a chunk on how we might think about the process of retirement, ideally several years before that happens, so that there's a smooth transition where we continue to support our brains. So the answer is it's for everybody, Josh. That's where we've ended up. Yeah,
of course, yes. Well, you'd make a good point. Is that it's you typically start thinking about these sorts of things at a certain age, right? When you generally as you get older, you start realizing that you're mortal and that cognitive decline is a real thing that can happen, and you start to be concerned about that. However, ideally you want to be mindful of that and putting things in place and leading a lifestyle that's good for your brain before you typically start thinking of those things. So yeah, that's why it would be, not just relevant for people, midlife and beyond, but even earlier in their lives. I would say too, another way that can help get people a little bit younger to care about this is that much of what you talk about is probably going to be just as relevant for sort of day-to-day cognitive performance, right? So it's nice that the things that most of the time, the things that you would do for that, provided you're not sort of over optimizing for one particular type of performance, the things you're going to do for that are also the same things that you're going to do that are going to help protect the brain over the long term and build resilience. I assume you'd agree.
Yeah, absolutely. And so that's why, like earlier when I said that I was fairly confident that most of the information in the book will be relevant for the foreseeable future is for that reason, right? We know these things support cognitive function, sometimes very quickly, and then have the same effect long term if they're continued. And when we think about the importance of physical activity and sleep, for instance, nutrition, we've known these things for decades, and obviously research has improved and we've learned more, but that's not going to be irrelevant anytime soon. Like, these are going to be the core principles of supporting the brain for forever.
You mentioned that this has become a hot topic. I mean, a decade ago, I don't know if there was what was out there. There wasn't much, right, on brain health. Brain health wasn't discussed very often, and part of that was this sort of this nihilism or belief that it was all about amyloid and there's nothing you can do and so forth. So more has come out. How do you see what your book sort of differing than maybe some of the other stuff that's out there? What would be the more unique elements?
Yeah, so I think there's hopefully there's a few things that are unique. The one really important idea that I try and get across in several places is that there isn't this inevitable decline as we get older in our cognitive function, or that there's nothing that we can do about it. Because actually, even going back to some research in the sort of 50s, 60s, and 70s, so I give the example of Warner Shai's Seattle longitudinal study that was run out of the University of Washington, that rather than looking at overall population cognitive function, right? If you measure the cognitive function of several thousand people, and you plot their age along the bottom and their cognitive function on the y-axis on the side, you'll see that on average, with age, cognitive function declines, because there are some people, as they get older, their cognitive function does decline and they drag down the average.
Mhm.
But that's not the same as asking, well, how will my cognitive function look in 5, 10, 20 years' time? And so the Seattle Longitudinal Study was one of the first studies that took the same individuals, and they had continually had new waves, but every 7 years they would bring in new people, but they would look at the cognitive function of the people, 7 years on. And they did this every 7 years for multiple decades. And what they found was that the majority of people, so more than 50%, had stable cognitive function from their 60s into their 70s and into their 80s. So yes, the average dropped because there were some people whose cognitive function dropped, but most people sustained cognitive function, and this is well before we'd had the improvements we have in reducing heart disease and reducing exposure to toxins like lead in the environment that we know increase the risk of cognitive decline. So there's a lot of stuff that's improved a lot since then, and even back then, it was quite normal for somebody to sustain cognitive function. And nowadays, we think this is sort of unusual. We call them super agers because they've managed to sustain cognitive function from their 50s to their 80s. That's kind of the definition. But actually, it's something that I think we should expect. And it's something that's not that hard to do, because if you look at a talk about super agers, and basically they just don't develop significant metabolic disease. They continue to be active in their environment and learn new skills, and they're fairly physically active and they sleep fairly well. But it's nothing superhuman. It's just like attending to enough of the basics has a really big impact. And so just getting that message across that actually it can be quite normal to expect that our brains can continue to function late into life, and it doesn't take that much work to do it. I think that's really important, that people know that it's possible in the first place. And then the sort of next thing I think that's important is we talked about at the beginning of our chat here, the issues with reductionism, that we can sort of like isolate all these individual components of the brain or that affect the brain, and we generate these large lists, or we sort of have all these individual molecules that people think that we need to focus on. But actually, if we think about it as a system, which is kind of how I explain it, when you do one thing, like the whole system shifts, right? So if we're thinking about, you take up some new sport, right? Then you've got physical activity. Physical activity then improves cardiovascular function. It also improves vascular function in the brain, because you're sort of stimulating those blood vessels directly within the brain. You're probably doing some kind of social interaction with other people, right? That could improve other aspects of stress. It's also going to make you more likely to sleep that evening. So many factors that are important for brain function shift just because of one action. And it's the same sort of like if you quit smoking, right? If you quit smoking, your blood pressure improves, inflammation declines. This whole sort of bucket of factors all come along for the ride. And so that's one thing that I think is an important takeaway, which is that it's not like this big checklist of arduous things you have to do. Like if you just do one thing, you'll have the whole system shift in your favor. And so then I think we can see outsized effects just from small daily actions that you can sort of build up over time.
Yes. So definitely a more systems-based, holistic kind of outlook and framework than maybe what you would typically incline to see, and that's more focused on how to influence molecule X and with what supplement and so forth. So last question. The title is The Stimulated Mind, right?
Yeah.
So how'd you choose that title?
I think, like most people who write books, the title was chosen by somebody else. So it was my editor who chose the title, and it is a good title. I'm really happy with the final title.
And what does it mean, right?
Yeah.
To you,
Yes. So the main thing, and it's interesting because nowadays we often think about brains as being overstimulated, which is certainly in some respects a real issue, and I do talk about that in the book. But just this idea that the primary driver of cognitive function is how we use our brains, and really the kind of one of the core messages is just don't give up. Just keep giving your brain the inputs that it needs, and that, like I said, shouldn't have to be super arduous. It should be fun and with people you love, and doing things you enjoy. And so I think that's I really like that as a core message, and it's because people think about, oh, aren't our brains overstimulated? Then maybe that will kind of trigger a little interest to kind of check the book out.
Yeah, keep doing the things that brains evolved to do.
Yeah,
right.
That's essentially it.
Overstimulation is coming from lots of inputs that we weren't quite evolved to process.
Yeah.
Well, great. So you also have a special offer for those who are subscribers to the Substack.
Yeah. So, wait. It's the first thing. So we've done the title, but then I was going to show people the cover. So the cover isn't out yet. So I can show everybody. This is the cover. Ta-da! This is the best way I could figure out to share it on Substack, and we'll put it if people are just listening, then we'll also put it in the Substack. But so I saw Kevin asked about how to get an advanced copy. Kevin is actually a colleague of mine, so Kevin, I'll send you one, but also buy one, please, because that's important. But we'll put the link in the in the Substack thing. But essentially, you can search for it now wherever it is that you buy books. So Amazon, it's on Walmart, Target, Barnes and Noble, Bookshop.org. Is everywhere. So you should be, if you just search my name in the Stimulated Mind, you'll find it. So obviously it doesn't come out for several months. So then if people do want to buy it now, which I would very much appreciate, because it's helpful to have those pre-sales like Josh was saying, then I would like to give people something in return. So there are a few things that I'll do, and I would love some thoughts from you listeners as well. So the first is that I'm going to, for anybody who pre-buys the book, I'll do some live webinars on some topics around brain health that are covered in the book, or topics that you all would like to hear about. So they will be done live. If you're a follower and you pre-buy the book, you can come and join, and then you can also ask questions at the end. So I would love some thoughts from people in terms of what they would like me to cover in those webinars. If any thoughts, you can sort of add to the comments, and I'll definitely incorporate those. But the sort of the general themes will probably be something around the evidence behind how stimulus drives cognitive function, and that cognitive function, we should expect it to be sustainable late into life. And then some information on like the model and how I think about the brain, and then probably some stuff around how we can use this just like in our day-to-day lives, like right now, to support our cognitive function and the work that we do. But any specific topics you'd like me to dig in deeper, you get the chance to pick that, and I'll do those. And then they'll be recorded, and so future people who buy the book in advance will also get access to those webinars. They just won't get them. They won't get to be there in person and interact if you choose to. That's only for people who are currently listening to the podcast. Then there will be a monthly draw where people who pre-buy the book, I'll send you some goodie boxes. They'll probably come towards the beginning of next year, but just like things that I like that I talk about in the book. So you might end up with a tub of creatine and some tins of sardines and some blueberry powder or something like that. It'll be things that I think that I like that kind of support some of the ideas that we have that I have in the book. They're not sponsored or anything like that. I'll buy them with my own money because they're products that I like. So it's not like connected to anything else. So there'll be some draws for that, and then as well, at some point there'll be some live events. There'll be a book launch, probably in Seattle, maybe in a couple of other cities. And so right at the end, I'll do one final draw, and a person who's pre-bought the book, I will pay for them to come to a live event in person. And Josh, we also had the idea that we'll record a podcast live in person at one of these events. So Josh, I'll pay for you to come too, and we can hang out with whoever whoever wins. So those are the current offers. So you'll get at least the webinars, maybe some of the goodie boxes, and maybe a trip to Seattle in March. I can't guarantee the weather will be great, but the conversation will be great. But sort of finally, if anybody has any other thoughts about things that I could give you or that I could give people who pre-buy the book, let me know. Would love to hear them. I'm just so grateful that people are interested, and it's just very nice if we can drum up some enthusiasm early. I haven't said that if you do buy the book, if you just take a screenshot of whatever receipt or anything like that, if you send it to us in Substack, then we'll know that you've pre-bought the book, and I'll include you on the list of all those things. And then if you're listening to the podcast and you're not a member of the Substack, subscribe to the Substack and send us your receipts, and then I can start to build a database of people where I can do the draws for the other things later down the line.
Fantastic. Exciting stuff. A lot to look forward to over the coming months. Again, the actual book, do you know the release date?
It will be March 24th, 2026 in the US, and March 26th in the UK, just because they release books on different days of the week.
All right. And without looking, can you give me the subtitle to your book?
Future-proof your brain from dementia and stay sharp at any age.
Nice. Well done. Not easy. All right. Okay. Well, anything else?
No, I think that's it. Thanks for the opportunity to talk about it. Thanks everybody for joining and listening. Any questions? Anything else that I can tell you about the book? You will no doubt hear about it again, because we're still several months away. But I appreciate I appreciate all the we've got some nice messages in the chat, and I appreciate everybody's support. It really means a huge amount to me.
Absolutely. And I think it's safe to say that if you guys like this podcast, you're going to like this book. So
yeah.
All right. Well, thank you everybody for listening. And if you have questions that you want us to answer on a future episode, feel free to leave them send them to us on Substack, or you can go to brainjo.academy/questions. And there's always a link in the podcast description to that as well. You can submit it there. Okay. Thank you all. Thanks, Tommy.
Thank you. Thanks everybody for listening.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.